Go ahead and start from the first slide. And so hopefully, is everybody seeing my screen okay?
Yeah.
All right, good deal. So thanks to the Dayton Microcomputer Association for having me. My topic this evening is stupid cyber criminal tricks and how to combat them. As you can see on the title slide, my name is Matt Scheurer. If you're on Twitter, give me a follow at C3RKAH. I'm, I think, within like 10 people of getting 666 followers, so questions will be answered. Those of you on the call can get us closer there. If you want to hit me up on LinkedIn, there's the information. Also, if you want to download a PDF of the slide deck, it is online now at slideshare.net/circa. And so that's got the full presentation, all the links and so forth. As quickly thrown together as this was, it basically boiled down to a busy work day and seeing an email from Peter like, hey, man, we're desperate for a speaker. Can you speak on Tuesday? And I'm like, I don't really have anything ready. That's fantastic. Okay. So anyway, I've done my best. So with that, we'll go ahead and go through it. So forgive it if, there's maybe some things off a little bit in the slide deck. I was hastily thrown together, so I didn't spend a lot of time proofreading and editing here. But anyway, here goes. So about me, I work for a big, well-known business. His condition of employment, they asked me to basically just be hush-hush about where I work. But I'll tell everybody it's someplace big. Pretty much everybody on this call will have heard of it. I work as an information security engineer, as Peter said, performing digital forensics and incident response on a computer security incident response team. I am the chair for the SIMPA Security SIG. We meet the third Thursday of every month. I've got a cheap plug later on. Hopefully you guys don't mind that. So Peter asked me to explain BugCrowd a little bit. It is a bug bounty hunting program. It's a crowdsourced organization. So essentially people can sign up as independent security researchers and paid hack stuff. One of the things I like to do is evangelize that, particularly if people are looking to get into information security, they're having they're having trouble finding that very first opportunity getting into that type of job. It's a great way to do it because the barrier to entry is very low. Basically, you have to submit some basic stuff so they can prove your tax status and stuff like that. So it takes a little bit of a leap of faith, but otherwise, it's absolutely free to join. The barrier to entry is very low. You'll get paid to basically find vulnerabilities within systems, applications, things like that. You're not going to get rich off of it in all likelihood, but if you're looking to break into the industry and you're having problems getting that first opportunity, it's a great way to get professional experience you can then put on your resume and talk about in job interviews. And if you do a good job and you got a couple things you can talk to, that'll go a long way towards helping. So that's BugCrowd. With that, I got a couple quick disclaimers. Hate doing these, but yeah, so I have a day job, but the opinions expressed tonight by me are solely based on my own independent security research. They don't expect or express the views or opinions of my employer. And somebody talked about, oops, I think I went the wrong way. Somebody talked about toppling governments. If you do, that's on you, because the second disclaimer is that this is for educational purposes. I'm not responsible for its use or misuse, and no warranties or guarantees are implied or otherwise in effect. So use of these tools, techniques, and technologies are at your own risk. So basically, if you get in trouble doing something stupid, don't blame me. Don't call me. I'm not going to bail you out of jail. You're on your own. You've been warned. So the premise of the talk is cyber criminals. Why am I calling them cyber criminals? Simply because they are not hackers. If you will, call them threat actors, malicious threat actors, cyber criminals, or just criminals. The reason why is because those of us who actually consider ourselves real hackers sort of get put off when we read headlines and they're talking about hackers when they really mean criminals. It would be sort of like somebody throwing a grand piano off the top of a tall building to specifically kill somebody, and then the news media reporting them as a musician murdering somebody, when in fact it's just somebody taking advantage of some instrument, not somebody that could actually play the piano. So that's why they're cyber criminals. They're not real hackers. So one of the common things that people think is that I don't have anything worth taking. Criminals, there's nothing I have worth taking. I've just got my own computer or such a small business. Somebody's going to bother with us. Well, the fact is that that's just a bad attitude. And in fact, if that's your attitude, and hopefully it's nobody on this call, but for anybody, if that's their attitude, they're really part of the problem. And the reason why is because if you have a computer on the internet, that's valuable real estate. And it doesn't matter if you consider yourself the Baltic and Mediterranean avenues on the Monopoly board. The bottom line is that criminals look at that as, hey, it's a footprint on the internet and something I can pivot attacks through. So what can happen? This is a picture I've taken from Brian Krebs' blog. So if you're not familiar with KrebsOnSecurity.com, highly recommend going out there and checking it out on a regular basis. Sign up for his mailing list. The particular graphic here, I've got a link to the article he wrote about this. It basically goes to show all the things can be done with a hacked computer and why it's valuable, even if people think it isn't, because basically the criminals aren't going to use their own systems to do a lot of this stuff directly attributable through them. They're going to go to your systems if they can and use them for all sorts of nefarious purposes. So you see all sorts of things you can do with a using a hacked computer as a web server to launch email attacks for virtual goods, reputation hijacking, bot activity. That's a big one. Account credentials, financial credentials, and then hostage attacks. All sorts of things that malicious threat actors will use for computers that they can compromise. And if you look under a web server, imagine this: the police kick in your door and they arrest you and they find child pornography on your computer. Yeah, you may not know how it got there, and you can try to explain to the police and the judge, hey, this stuff isn't mine. You think the people that really do that kind of stuff tell them the same thing? I'm guessing they probably do. So it's better just to not be in that position in the first place. And this talk isn't really completely comprehensive. It's not going to go into depth on everything, but basically it's just about doing the basics right to make yourself a harder target and a less likely victim to these sort of things. Hopefully that makes good sense. So I want to talk a little bit about some operational security essentials. And the bottom line is run up-to-date software and keep it patched. Also, make sure you're on supported systems and devices, that they're at least current enough where you're getting updates and patches for them still. Also, harden and just securing your network equipment, especially anything you have that's internet-facing. And then where you can, change default usernames. Some devices don't permit that, but usually, at the very least, you can change the default password. And those are all things you should definitely do. And then just some OpSec basics. Look, AV is not bulletproof. The phishing forensics talk, in fact, one of the samples you're going to see tonight actually defeats every AV scanner out there. And we'll talk about that a little bit, at least in terms of throwing something on VirusTotal. It's got 70 some odd antivirus scan engines built into it. And I've got a sample that actually defeats all of them. So it's still important, though, to get the low-hanging fruit for that. And if it's one of those things, I'm not a big throw money at the problem kind of guy, and you're going to get a lot of that tonight because a lot of the things I'm giving you are things you can do for absolutely free or at a minimal cost. And believe me, I'm a total cheapskate. So when I say minimal, I mean minimal. I mean, you guys are talking about Zoom and Microsoft Teams. I'm like a Jitsi guy because you know what? That thing's free. It's very private, and in terms of you can be about as anonymous as you want to be. There's no sign-in, no nothing. Yeah, it's also open so that anything could be, overheard or seen in a chat window or whatever, but it's definitely private in terms of, but it's open and private. It's an interesting platform for sure. But anyway, Immunet is actually really just it's Cisco AMP, Cisco Advanced Malware Protection. Now Immunet, so AMP client works on virtually every platform there is, mobile and OS. The Immunet for free client is really Windows only, but I mean, it's enterprise grade, next generation antivirus, absolutely for free. So it's a great complement if all you have is Windows Defender on your Windows systems. And then, firewall, like a host-based intrusion detection system, host-based intrusion prevention system, basically some sort of a firewall that's really looking out for stuff. If all you have is the Windows firewall, start looking for online tutorials and make sure you got that thing tuned up a little bit. Or, if you are going to go with a commercial solution, you can absolutely buy something better. So when it comes to credential safeguarding, use strong passwords, and really the strongest passwords are long passphrases. How long is long? Well, for me, it's at least 15 characters, just because if you harken back to the old MTLM vulnerabilities, where you can get password hashes out, even if you're only using version 2, those things would still be available. So if you're 14 characters, or well, if you're beyond 14 characters, usually you're pretty safe. And if you're struggling with that, just it doesn't have to be anything crazy. It could be "I love Peter Hess" could be your passphrase that you could use. So the other important thing, and we're going to definitely touch on this a couple bullet points down, but avoid password reuse. So don't use the same password you use for your email, for online banking, for all sorts of other important stuff, or even trivial stuff, your social media accounts and so forth. Now understand that when you do those things, it's hard to remember all those passwords, right? So what do you do about that? KeyPass is a fantastic free solution, and if you go out and get the slide deck, there's a link to that there, and it's just KeyPass as it's spelled on the screen, .info, I-N-F-O. Also LastPass.com has some free subscriptions. So if the difference between the two is if you're running KeyPass, it's really for desktop type operating systems, and it's going to be on your local machine. It doesn't really travel with you. If you're mostly on your mobile devices or portable devices, where that's not a great option, you could look at something like LastPass. I know they've had some issues in the past. There aren't very many cloud services out there, frankly, that haven't had issues with vulnerabilities and breaches and so forth. But it's better to use a service like that. You're probably a little more secure than if you're using the same password everywhere and it's relatively easy to crack, or it gets breached on one site and all of a sudden people run what are called credential stuffing attacks. These cyber criminals will take that username and password or your email address and password, and they'll just start submitting it against all sorts of stuff just in the hopes of getting a hit. So, all of a sudden they maybe get one of your passwords and it happens to be the same password that you're using for Amazon.com. Well, they can hop on, change your shipping address, and start ordering stuff through your Amazon account, stuff like that. So how do you know if that's maybe happened already? I've got a link there for haveibeenpwned.com, which is operated by Troy Hunt. It's a fantastic site. You're able to go out there, put in your email address, and it'll actually then tell you if that's been found in a known data breach. Now, granted, could it have been found in an unknown data breach? Absolutely. But a lot of people send stuff to Troy that they find so that he can put it in his database. So it's a really cool site. If you haven't checked it out, definitely do that. And by all means, if you find a service where your email account or your username has been found to be on a breach site, start changing those passwords. Very important stuff. So multi-factor, at the very least dual factor authentication. should probably use that stuff. It's, again, not a bulletproof solution, but it's another layer. Now, the important thing is, if you're using dual factor, is to understand its use and its intended purpose. If you just click on everything without giving it a moment's thought, it's kind of useless. And so people don't necessarily understand that. You would think that people would get that, but I've listened to Dave Kennedy talk, and they said that basically what they find is about 90% of people will actually just click on the approve button on their multi-factor without even giving it a second thought, and they're able to compromise people with the username and password just making that kind of a request. So use it, but also understand the purpose. If you get a prompt and you're not knowingly logging into a site or service that you're getting prompted for, don't approve it. Definitely deny it, and then chances are they might have your password. It's a good hint. Probably want to change your password when you see something like that happen. So the other thing I want to talk about for wireless and mobile, including like laptops, stuff like that, it becomes important if you're connecting to hotspots anywhere. And again, I'm not a big throw money at the problem kind of guy. So there's a lot of commercial solutions out there, and they'll run anywhere from $3 to $20 a month, or maybe a yearly fee or whatever. It's not a great service per se, but hey, maybe look at cloud@cost.com. They offer a VPN service. It's a Canadian-based company. I'm pretty sure they bust by night. It's like $27, and I don't mean $27 a month or even $27 a year. I mean like $27 forever, or until they go out of business. Now, no idea when that might be. They've lasted longer than I ever thought they would, but hey, it's basically it's an IPsec VPN, so it's end-to-end encryption. Maybe worth a look or consideration. And then you could also just run VPN at your own place. So if you want to spin up a pfSense VM, or you have an old system, something like that, you can throw pfSense on it. And there's all sorts of modules you can install, including VPN modules. If you're VPN connecting to your home internet from wherever you're traveling, that's generally just as well. So a threat actor might understand what your home IP address is. They could maybe target that, but chances are, really, if they see encrypted traffic they know they can't break, they're probably just going to wait for the easier target to hop on the same hotspot. And then also there are some home routers available that will have VPN built into them. I've got now it's a wired one. I've got wireless routers behind it that I really just use as access points and basically unmanaged switches. So I just have them inline in the network. They're not really functioning as routers per se, but they give me a few extra switch ports. But there are some better ones. I think the wired one I spent, it's it's like a TP-Link, and it's like a $70 router, but it supports the L2 TP VPN. So a lot of your bargain bin routers, wireless routers, if they have VPN built into them, a lot of times it's the point-to-point tunneling protocol, which is really kind of weak. Generally, it's better than nothing, but it is weak and it can be broken. So if you see LT2P, that's layer 2 tunneling protocol VPN. So again, that's really layer 2, right? That's at the MAC address level, and it's using IPsec, so it's really, truly end-to-end encryption. And by the way, that cloud@cost absolutely will give you IPsec VPN as well, and that will work on, again, Windows systems, Linux. It's a little chore to put in Linux because sometimes LT2P isn't in there by default. It's not too painful to add it, but Mac, iPhone, and Android, most of your common platforms can support it. So those are all good options, just to kind of stay safe. So when it comes to scams, really just be skeptical. And the 20-sided die here is, I remember back to, I have a lot of people, I knew a lot of guys that would play like D&D and stuff like that, and there's this concept in there called disbelieve. And the idea was that if you saw like a monster in front of you, and you believed it was real, it could actually hurt you for real, even though this thing didn't actually exist. So if you ran this challenge called disbelieve, I rolled to disbelieve, you could actually make this thing go away in your mind, and it could no longer hurt you because it's never there in the first place. And so scams are sort of like that. If you choose not to believe the scam, you're not going to fall for it if you don't act on those things. So some of the important things are, if you get a link in your email saying, hey, you need some important account maintenance, or give us a call or click on a link or whatever, don't maybe trust the email. Actually look on the back of your credit card, or look up the service and find the customer support number, something like that. Do it yourself. Don't just take what you read at face value. Actually go out and do it yourself, or rather than clicking the link in the email, actually open up your browser, type in the website address in the address bar, or search it on Google, and then click on the link there. Don't actually click on the link in the email that you get. We're going to talk about email scams a little bit later tonight. I got some live demo stuff for you there. So just some important things. Microsoft isn't going to call you to say, hey, there's a problem we diagnosed remotely, so send us some money, give us a credit card, or send us gift cards or whatever. The IRS won't ask for gift cards as payments. They're not really sending the police over. They're not going to call you on the phone. You'll get some certified letters, something like that. These are common things that scammers use. And then the other thing that happens, if you're in a business or you have a small business, make sure people have a workflow to follow to verify things like wired payments or ACH deposits or transfers. Anything involving money, there should be a series of steps where somebody has to go through to actually authorize that and make sure it's legitimate rather than just send it, because a lot of businesses have been taken for a lot of money through just that scam. And well, that's just social engineering. That's just people emailing, pretending to be the CEO or the CFO or a comptroller or somebody that would make a request like that. My advice is get verbal confirmation on that stuff. So if you get something like that in an email or an instant message or something like that, pick up the phone and actually call them so recognize their voice and you can actually talk to them directly. What you need to be aware of is that you don't want to just email the person back or instant message them back saying, hey, is this a real thing? Because what could have happened is the threat actors may have already compromised that remote account for email or instant messaging or whatever have you. And they are still pretending to be that person even though they're not really that person. And then finally, the Better Business Bureau has some great resources and reference material on scams. So check them out at bbb.org/scam tracker. And, a lot of times, COVID-19 stuff right now is a lot of the rage, and it could be everything from, fake charitable contribution requests to information to, we've seen a lot of deep fakes where, hey, this is a COVID-19 map to show the hot spots and so forth, and it's really just backloaded with some sort of an exploit kit. So just be wary of all those kind of things. If my mom were here to talk to you tonight, she would tell you if something seems too good to be true, then it probably is. And mom knows best, so definitely listen to mom here. She knows what she's talking about. So I want to talk about phishing. And again, it's really just a social engineering attack using email. And so we talked about things that don't really have a payload. They're just scripted to fool somebody into sending gift cards or money or, prepaid credit card or, things like that to, or some sort of a ACH check transfer deposit or something like that. But things that actually have malicious payloads, usually they're going to, include attachments and links. And why am I talking about phishing? Well, simply because it's the number one attack leveraged and also the number one successful way that data breaches happen. Something like, I think the Verizon Data Breach Incident Response Report showed that over 70% of attacks were phishing, and over 90% of data breaches started with phishing. And why is it so popular? Well, it's leveraged by the most inexperienced script kiddies, but also nation states use it. And these are countries that have great resources to put in these kind of things. And think about it. So if you're a nation state, you spent maybe millions of dollars developing a zero-day exploit, but you wouldn't necessarily go to that first. If you're going to target somebody or an organization or a country or a government or a political party or whatever you have, they're basically going to try the easy stuff first because, frankly, it's got a high track record of success. It's very inexpensive to do, and it's a pretty easy thing to do. You might spend a little bit of time in recon and really spear phishing that thing, targeting a specific individual or individuals. But really, if it's convincing enough and you send it out to, however many people, whether it's one person or, 100,000 people, you only need one person to fall for it in most cases for the breach to be successful. But it's heavily leveraged everywhere. And this is, again, Brian Krebs again, sort of similar to what you saw with the scrap value of a hacked PC. Well, this is the value of a hacked email account. And you can see that when they compromise an email account, they can use it for a lot of different purposes. And it doesn't matter if it's a corporate account, if it's a Microsoft 365 account, which I guess they're now transitioning from Office 365 to Microsoft 365, or if it's just a free Outlook.com, Hotmail, Yahoo Mail, Gmail account, they can all be used for these purposes. And again, there's the reference to where the article is at. Great read, and Brian Krebs has a lot of great practical advice and explains things very well. So it's great reading material. If you're not a regular, frequent reader of his blog, I personally recommend it. It's good stuff. He's been looking at this stuff for a long time. So he used to be a Washington Times reporter and then struck it out on his own, and he's been doing that for quite a while. He's very well read across the information security industry. So it's pretty cool. I actually have a selfie with him on my phone. So cool guy. He does a lot of good stuff. I like his material quite a bit. So I want to talk about what an email message actually is, because people sometimes just look at email and they think it's just this magic thing that really just kind of can't be understood. There's a lot of really special stuff to it. It's actually really very simple stuff. If you actually look at an email, it's really just one big long text file, and it's got some logical parts to it. So it's got headers, it's got a message body, and it may or may not have attachments. Attachments are optional. But when you look at it, it's just one big string of text, and so the attachments are really just base64 encoded content that then your email client will basically decode back into a some sort of a binary file, whether it's a zip file or an image file or a Office document. Anything really that gets embedded as an attachment just gets converted to base64, and then it gets basically exploded back out. So the other thing to note is that, of course, emails, they might contain hyperlinks, and that can either be in the message body or it can actually be inside the attachment itself. And we're going to look at a couple examples of that. So there are a lot of different email clients out there, email services and so forth. Rather than go over each one, here's just a link to MX Toolbox. Has a great article that covers a ton of different email clients. And they talk to you about how to get the headers out. And a lot of those articles also talks about how to view the message source. But we're going to look at a couple examples as well. We'll do that here momentarily. So when it comes to attachments, something you can do if you're not sure, if you get an attachment and you think, well, wasn't expecting this, it might be legitimate, it might be bad, how do you know? You take a leap of faith? Well, one thing you can do is you can save out the attachment and then use virustotal.com, which is currently owned by Google. But basically what VirusTotal is they've got 70 plus different AV scanners. You can upload a file to their site and it'll basically check it against all of them. And it's from like the biggest names in antivirus products that you would see on a shelf at Micro Center or Staples or whatever, all the way to things that you may never even have heard of. And, you know, of course, one or two AV engines might detect a false positives because they'll do heuristics where they're looking for, you know, behavioral indicators rather than matching strings as an attempt to be a little better at detecting things. The important thing to know with VirusTotal is there are people have commercial accounts to it. So anything you upload there can be publicly obtained. So if you think it's something that's got sensitive information in there, you probably just want to stick with scanning it with your local antivirus engine rather than uploading it to the cloud. My premise, or the way I think of it, is I just assume if I upload something that the whole rest of the world is going to be able to see it. Doesn't matter where I upload it. I just assume if it's a file I'm uploading somewhere, good chance the whole rest of the world can see it. The other thing we talked about, hyperlinks. So you can also check those out in VirusTotal. But one place I actually recommend starting with is urlscan.io. It'll basically check it out, give you like a risk score. But the other cool thing is it'll also show you where the link started, but it also shows you the final link. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that threat actors do to sometimes throw us off of our tracks. So once you have that final landing page, you can then go to VirusTotal. The other cool thing about urlscan.io is it will now give you the screenshots of the web page that you're scanning, basically, so you can see what it looks like. So, you know, you get this hyperlink and it claims to be something, and you punch in the urlscan.io, it'll check it out, it'll give you a verdict on whether it thinks it's good or bad. You always have to take that stuff with a grain of salt. But the cool thing is you can see if it looks like an Office 365 email login page and it's some domain you've never even heard of before. At that point, you know it's just some credential harvesting phishing site. But this is really good. So a lot of reasons I like urlscan.io. And this is not a comprehensive list. I mean, there's like a ton of pages that are similar to these. These are a couple go-tos for me personally. A couple of beware of gotchas that threat actors will use. They'll use like a URL shortener, and I'll demo that here in a moment. They'll also use evasion code or domain generation algorithms, where they'll basically create like a random subdomain for a primary domain, and that's really just meant to throw people off, make it harder to block, things like that. And they'll use things like iframes, redirects, forwards. They'll use encoded content. The other thing is just to remember that, you know, even your best-in-class security vendor products can be defeated. So relying too heavily on your defenses and just assuming they're going to protect you from everything, that's not the case. And certainly I talked about my phishing forensics talk where I've got something that's got a bad attachment, but it defeats everything. So nothing's perfect, but you know, these are just a lot of the precautions you can take to kind of help protect yourself. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to some live demo stuff. And so we're going to cover looking at email message source, and we're going to look at potential malicious content where it may exist in attachments and in hyperlinks going to phishing sites. So bear with me here and see if I can switch over to some example emails I have. Let me go ahead and pop open this first one here. So here we have a sample phishing email. I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger. All right, so some of the small headers may be a little bit hard to see, but basically it's spoofed from a fake Verizon lookalike domain. It's not really a Verizon domain. It's just something I made up that really anybody could register on Namecheap for probably about $12 or so. And this is kind of an older example, but it could go to anybody. So there are several hyperlinks in here, and the funny thing is, like, these are actually real links to the real site. It's really just meant to throw people off. There's nothing really like super obvious about this other than it says, hey, your invoice is attached to the message. But there's not really, it's not like a hard sell. It's really just a soft sell. And so you come down here and look, and sure enough, here at the bottom of the screen, there's an attachment on this message. So, sometimes what people suggest is, hey, just mouse over and then look at the bottom to see where the address is. Depending on the email client, there have been some vulnerabilities to that. Some have addressed it, some haven't, where some will actually execute like JavaScript on hover commands and can actually execute code that way. What I usually do is if I'm investigating something, I'll look at the message source. And here in Thunderbird, there's a couple things I could do. I'm going to skip headers. It's like the first thing I'll look at. But for our purposes tonight, we're really just going to look at the message source code. I'm going to make this a bit bigger, and then we'll go ahead and scroll through. I usually search on HTTP, so I find HTTP and HTTPS links. And all of these particular links are okay. There's nothing malicious about them. They all go to real Verizon pages. What's interesting is, if you remember, there were a couple images within that email, and here's actually the image source. So you see something going to a site, and it's hacked-site.ru. Well, .ru is the country code for Russia, right? So that really kind of should raise some eyebrows and make you think, why would Verizon send me something using files hosted out of Russia? It doesn't make sense. And you can see it's really just buried pretty far deep, in terms of the subfolders that it's buried in. It's got a long, weird name to it. And then you look down here a little further, and again, you find another one, and it's a different file name. And really, those are the image files. And those aren't hyperlinks to the site per se. You can see they're actually part of the image source for this email. And then we got the base64 encoded attachment, like I talked about earlier. So here's the attachment you saw in the email. It's really just a big long string of base64 text. And really, that's kind of the end of it. So if we're not going to click on these links, like, these are the kind of things that we could get in, if you want to live a little bit on the wild side, you can right click on these and copy the link location. Again, you're taking a little bit of risk if your email client supports on hover mouse commands. Basically that's where we can see that these, are going to sites. But while you're in the source, you could basically copy that string of text, go to urlscan.io, plug it in there, and that's usually what I recommend. Let's go ahead and take a look at this attachment, and rather than actually just open it up, I'm actually just going to go ahead and save it, and we'll go ahead and save it out here to this folder, and then what I usually like to do with like a PDF file is I'll open it up in a text editor, and in this case, go ahead and do that. Oops, I clicked the wrong thing. Hold on. So I'll just find my editor here. just a good text editor because it's not going to execute any sort of code or whatever. There's some weird formatting stuff here at the top. We'll just kind of skip through that. And again, I'm just going to just tell it edit anyway. And again, I'm going to search on HTTP. And so here's actually, a hyperlink within the file. So I'm going to copy that out. And then we'll look and just make sure, again, in this particular example, there's only one hyperlink inside of this. And it's a bit.ly address. And so bit.ly, if you remember, where I was talking about URL shorteners being used to hide where the page is going. So there's a trick with bit.ly, where if you put in a bit.ly address inside the address bar and put a plus sign after it and click enter, it doesn't actually take you to the real site. What it does is it actually expands and shows you where the site is actually going to. So here we can see it's actually going to a, ihealthweb.com. And again, this is another tip off that, like, this probably didn't come from Verizon, because this isn't, something where my invoice would be posted out to. The other thing you can do is you can just Google URL expander, and you can click any of these. There's a whole bunch of them. And you paste in your short URL, expand it. And here you can see, the long URL. It's actually going somewhere completely different. So it's definitely a couple tricks you can use to figure out where those things are actually going. And I'll just go pull up Fish Tank. It's not really part of anything I'm demoing, but it's a great place I usually go to find example phishing things. We'll just click on a couple IDs here, and this one doesn't have a screenshot yet. But basically, a lot of people will post things out here. Let's see if we can find a good one. All right, so here we go. Here's one where somebody's reported a link that they got in some sort of a phishing thing, and it's basically trying to grab credentials or whatever. I'm not going to read this in great detail, but you can see where somebody's basically going to a lot of trouble to basically harvest. And these are the kind of things where these long URLs can sometimes lead. Now, you can't just ignore all bit.ly things, because sometimes legitimate vendors and services will actually use those. So there's a couple, just some things you can do. The other thing you can do is you can also go to virustotal.com, and again, you can upload your attachments directly to here and see if they find anything. So we'll go ahead and upload our invoice file, and you can see it was looked at a couple years ago. We'll go ahead and reanalyze the file. It shouldn't take too long. You can see what it's doing is it's scanning here. And actually, this is interesting. So somebody actually does detect this as malicious. But if you saw from a couple years ago, absolutely nothing detected this as being malicious. So that's kind of interesting. It's actually kind of cool. So I'm trying to remember. I think Cisco owns Sentinel-1, if I'm not mistaken. So we actually have one detection on here. It's one of these things where, again, one could be a false positive. Even a couple of these could be a false positive when you're scanning a file. What I've observed on VirusTotal, URL is a lot less likely to catch stuff. So if you're scanning a URL, if you see it on one thing, it's actually a pretty good chance it might really be malicious. If you see it on two, you can almost take it to the bank. If it's three or more, you know for sure that thing is almost, it's got to be malicious. Files, you can get a little bit higher false positive rate on, just some of my own personal observations on that stuff. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's take a look at a couple other phishing things. Before we do, so there's a couple sites you can use. like PDF to JPEG.net, I think is the site. Watch me end up on some horrible site. Oh, I know why. Yeah, so here we go. So here's something where I can, if I actually want to see what this thing looks like without actually opening it up on my local system, I don't have like a dedicated sandbox, something like that, I can upload this thing. It'll convert it to a image file where there's no chance of having malicious source code or whatever. And here's what this thing looks like, right? So it's saying, hey, here's your invoice, and you know, it's ready for download. So the idea is that you would click on this link here and presumably get your invoice. But the reality is we know it goes to that bit.ly address, which is really just a shortener service that sends you somewhere completely different to a bad phishing page. And so again, be cautious, because if I upload it to a free site like this, I'm just going to assume that this whole thing could be seen by anybody, or the site could be breached, and whatever I'm uploading could be visible to anybody. We have enough indicators that this is probably something bad, or we can kind of throw a little bit of that caution to wind, because we already kind of know from all those other hints, like there's no way this is legitimate email. So look at a couple other examples here. So here's a fun one. I see a lot of stuff like this. In this case, I had a little bit of fun with it, from Evil Scammer at promisewearelegit.com with the subject of "This link is totally safe." Of course, the funny thing is, hello phishing target, we have a really important message for you. To retrieve your message, click here. Nothing subtle about that at all. And again, we can tell it's basically going to some bad URL. If we go ahead and we can look at the message source on this, and there's not a whole lot to this, so it's pretty easy to look at the message source and kind of see what's going on here once we get past the header information. So, and let me make that just a little bit smaller. And so here we have basically, hyperlink going to hacksite.com, WP content, themes, X. So, it's basically, again, that safe way we can kind of get out and copy out a hyperlink that we could then, punch into like URL scan.io, virus total, stuff like that. So again, this is really just meant to trick somebody into clicking a link. Examples, neither of these examples are really super subtle. This is one that's really meant to sort of scare somebody into clicking a link. But you do see stuff like this where it's pretending to come from PayPal support, basically telling somebody they have 4 hours to stop a change to their banking account numbers on their PayPal account. This is sort of what I talked about, where you want to actually go to the site yourself and log in rather than clicking on the link here. And the reason why is because it's, this address is right. That actually, if you wanted to sign into PayPal, that's actually the real address you would use. But if you click on the link, it's actually not going to take you there. So let's go ahead and look at the message source on this. And I'm going to, again, blow this up a little bit. And so here we see that here's the link text to the PayPal sign-in. Here's where the link is actually going. And here we see it's going to some site in Belgium. And so this is another indication of a compromised site. These are where those tools like URL scan.io, virus total can help you determine if these things are going somewhere malicious or legitimate. But as I said, this is definitely one of those things where you want to be careful, because if you just clicked on this link, you're going to get to a site, and that site may look like your PayPal login, but this is not PayPal. So just some quick phishing examples here. Let me go back to the slide deck. And we'll continue on. Oops. So I want to talk a little bit about script kiddies. So they may be low-skilled attackers, but they are actually a real threat. They actually cause real damage and real problems, real harm. So some offensive security tools have just become so user-friendly and simple. The barrier to entry has gotten really low to using these things. So we're going to use Kali Linux and some of the tools built into that, such as SPARTA, which has been replaced by Legion in newer versions. It's a little bit buggy, so I'm using a little bit of an older version of Kali for that reason. OWASP Zap and Armitage, just to see how easy exploiting some of these vulnerabilities has become. So the takeaways, should be, if you have a business or you have assets, you might want to scan these things yourself, at least just to make sure that you're not leaking sensitive information out there completely accidentally. I can tell you, having worked at a hosting company, there were people that had, they operated their own WordPress sites, and they had plugins that would do backups and stuff like that. And that would back up their entire site database, things like that. But really, there was nothing that stopped that from being publicly accessible. So any threat actor that happened to run the right tool to find that could basically get the whole database, which might have all kinds of sensitive information. And also the WordPress logins historically were encrypted using MD5 hashes, which can be defeated now with modern computing, cloud computing. Those things are, I wouldn't say they're trivial, but they're definitely breakable. So the idea is that you probably just want to take a peek and make sure you're not leaking information out there yourself. So Kali Linux, it's a Linux distribution. It's completely free to download and use. So it's at kali.org. A lot of penetration testers use it. It's basically a distribution that's chock full of information security tools. You're going to see just a small few of these things demoed tonight. So I'm going to start with OWASP Zap. So it's the OWASP Z Attack Proxy. It's a free security scanner basically for websites, web applications. It's basically OWASP, so it's volunteer run, put together. But it can find vulnerabilities in your web applications and basically aid your testing and development. Hopefully you're finding these things in a dev and QA environments before they go to production. But it's also a great tool for experienced penetration testers. And I'm not going to go into great details. It's really an intercepting proxy. I'm not going to do any of that crazy stuff. But I'm just going to show you really quickly at a high level that we're going to use it to find hidden files on a website. And it'll basically uncover accidental exposure. And sensitive data exposure is actually number 3 on OWASP top 10 list. Currently. So it's a big problem. It's kind of a big deal. And we're going to look at what that looks like. So I've got a demo website that I've got created. Let me go ahead and launch Zap here real quick. All right, so this is loading up here, and give me just a moment. It should pop up here just momentarily. So I've got basically a website that I've created, and I'm running kind of a local version of that, just in the interest of time to see. In real life, it generally takes a lot longer, but you'll get the idea of how this thing works and just how simple it is, right? It's not something that takes highly skilled attackers to leverage to find accidentally exposed data. So we'll go ahead and just start it up here. And to show you how simple this tool is to find accidental exposure, I'm just going to click on Automated Scan. And I'm literally just going to type in a website address. And again, it's just going to get it on my local box. And I'm just going to do that. I'm just clicking one thing. And this is, by the way, it's a free download. Yeah, it comes on Kali Linux, but anybody can download this. It does require Java, but it'll run on virtually any platform. Just punch in the one click, punch in the website address, click the attack button, and look at the spider here. Once that gets done, I'm going to go back to the spider tab. And I know this is a little bit of eye chart, so apologize about that. But what it's done is it's basically crawled the website and produced a list of files. Make this a little easier for our demo. I'm just going to click on the export button, and let me go ahead and throw it in my folder here. And let's call it spider.csv. It's exported it successfully. At this point, I'm just going to go ahead and stop. I got really what I needed out of this and what I wanted to demo. I'm going to go ahead and close this. Don't care about saving it. All right, let me get the CSV opened up for everybody. Here we are. It's just going to open up in a spreadsheet application, so it's real easy to see and look at. Let me go ahead and do that. And yeah, it should be a good size for everybody. And what this has done is it's just given me a list of everything that is found on the web server. The important thing to note is I actually took precautions to make sure this stuff doesn't accidentally get found. So like there's for example, a robots text file that tells search engines don't crawl these parts of the web page. And there's basically a sitemap XML that says only look in these pages. A tool like OSZap not only ignores those rules, but it actually uses them to help find things that might be interesting. So things that like a legitimate web crawler like Google will ignore because you've defined those things in those files to do, it'll actually use them to seed. So the robots text file and sitemap XML, it's actually going to use those really as its starting point, but it's going to crawl through and really look for everything. Now in reality, this is a active defense site. It's from a talk I have called Active Defense, Helping Threat Actors Hack Themselves. So you wouldn't really want to grab these files, but this is exactly what bad guys will do, those malicious threat actors. And how easy is this? It's found in an employee salary history xls.zip file on the web page. Really, it's as simple now as just copying that location, pasting in a web browser, and now all of a sudden I've got this file that people wouldn't normally just, there's no way you could go to the home page, click around and find this thing. It's actually hidden on the website, but this crawler found it anyway. So, and again, in the real world, you wouldn't actually want to download that file, but you go through the list and now all of a sudden, hey, look, we got a human resource information system employee MySQL database backup file, and it's just sitting out there on the website. And you might be wondering, well, does this really happen? Absolutely it happens. There's actually been some very noteworthy data breaches where this exact thing has happened. It's gotten a little better recently, but this also extends into cloud computing. So a lot of people would get Amazon S3 buckets, accidentally expose them to public, and all of a sudden anybody who happened to be crawling around could find these things and download them and grab them. They've since made it a lot harder to accidentally share out stuff using those platforms, but people are already grandfathered in. It's still possible to override and make those things accessible. Even worse, in a couple of those data breach incidents, like not only were the buckets open to the public and publicly exposed, but they also were publicly exposed with write access. So a lot of bad stuff happens. But again, how hard was that to find these files? It's actually very simple, right? So any script kiddie can do this. And as simple as that seems, I actually have a friend who got paid money on a bug bounty hunting job just doing something this simple and finding files that weren't supposed to be out there. So let's go back to the Oops. Yeah. All right. Go back to the talk here. So we've seen Zap real quick. So I'm going to switch over to Kali Linux. And again, I kind of talked about SPARTA. So I assume a lot of people on this call probably use Nmap, the network mapper, which is great to find what is out there. It'll do things like OS fingerprinting. It'll find ports and services that are listening on IP addresses. It'll find, if you scan an entire IP block, it'll find the ones that have live systems residing on them. It's a fantastic tool. That's also included in SPARTA, which is, again, Kali switched over to Legion, which is just an open source fork of SPARTA. But they really work and function right now. There's very little aesthetic differences. I like some of the stuff that Legion's doing on their underpinnings, but honestly, it's a little bit buggy, which is why I'm demoing this stuff in SPARTA, because frankly, there were some things that were crashing, and I don't have time to go back and debug the code and fix problems and all that stuff, particularly for a quick demo. But it's got a whole lot of stuff basically crammed into one easy-to-use tool, and there's a couple parts to it, and we'll cover that. So I'm going to use SPARTA to scan. I'm not going to do a whole network. I'm just going to do a single host in this case. But what it'll do is it'll find hosts and the services running on them. It'll also check for the services for vulnerabilities and do screen grabs and all sorts of other cool stuff. So let me switch over to my Kali box here. And very simple, so I'm just going to come here to the menu, vulnerability analysis, and click on SPARTA. And it's going to go ahead and launch for me here. I just click here to add a host to a scope. I happen to know what I want to scan. And again, normally I could do like a whole block of stuff or whatever. I'm just going to do a single IP address. But we're going to do a host discovery, and the stage scan is going to run a whole bunch of stuff here. Add this to scope. And basically, you can see at the bottom here, there's the progress bar, and it's scanning the host. And all of a sudden, it's starting to find services already. So it knows there's port 80. And you get a lot of great information here. So it's running TCP port 80. It's open, so that means it's listening. It tells us the service name. Even better, it's giving us the version of that. And now it's finding more and more ports. And it's going to keep on and continue on. So you get the idea here. It's finding all these different sites and services on this remote system. And you can kind of skip around on the bars up here at the top. But there's some other things to make this easier. So if I click on services, I can see just literally a list of services, and if I click on any one of these, it's going to give me more detail on what it knows about those particular services. So it just gives me a nice, easy list to see, and then it gives me more detail here on what's running and what ports, things like that. My personal favorite are like the tools. So with the tools on Hydra here. What's really cool is Hydra knows that this is an FTP service, and it's running an anonymous FTP. So I could log into the FTP service as anonymous and anonymous. It knows to basically test that username and password combination. So it gives me some great information here. So Nikto is a great application. It's basically a web vulnerability scanner. So it found a web server, and this is basically telling me what it knows about it. And basically it's checking against, the version against known vulnerabilities. It'll actually tell me what this thing might be susceptible to. And again, it's like any vulnerability scanner. You might get a certain level of false positives, but there's a chance that it might be vulnerable to some of these attacks. And you can usually look up the old open source vulnerability database information. to find out more about that. And sometimes they have exploit proof of concept code examples, things like that. So Screen Shooter is really cool. It gives me screenshots of those web servers, for example. That thing seems to be a little bit broken in Legion, which is why I'm demoing it in SPARTA. The other thing in SPARTA is the thing I'm going to demo next is on brute forcing, using a dictionary attack. That also seems to crash in Legion. They'll probably get it right eventually, but and maybe if I update it, they fixed it already. I don't know. But anyway, I just went back to this version. So anyway, this gives me a whole heap of information. And again, how hard was it, right? I just literally added the host, and it just took off and started scanning the thing. And I'm getting all this great information about it. Notice here, you get, again, it's going to do banner grabs, gives version numbers, things like that. So just a great tool. The other thing you can do with this is use the Hydra front end. Now there's actually other front ends built into Kali Linux for Hydra. Honestly, this is much simpler than most of the other ones. So quite literally, I'm just going to go ahead and add that same IP address in here. And we'll go ahead and scan SSH. So standard TCP port 22 SSH service. So we'll go ahead and turn on verbose output. Want to check the these other things though. Leave that one checked. So username and password lists. These are just simple dictionary files, and I've got a couple just, again, for the purpose of our quick examples. Normally these would be, tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of words. But let's just say here's some common user accounts that we want to try. Peter gave me his password earlier, but I think he might have more that maybe I can figure out here. So again, it's just a list of words, right? And this is what's going to seed our SPARTA. Here's a list of passwords. Hopefully nobody on this call is using any of these for your passwords. If you're using these things, change them now. They're not secure. People will figure that out, right? It's not even hard. But just a couple quick examples of username and password lists. I could use the same list for both of these. In the interest of time, I went ahead and made different ones. So let's go ahead and go to those. So I think I'm doing, username list first. So we'll go ahead and select that. We'll go ahead and select our password list. And I'm going to change the threads from the default of 16 to 4. 4 is recommended. Why it defaults to 16, I have no idea, but that's just kind of how that works. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and click run, and we'll see what happens here. And it's going to go ahead and it's basically just trying all those combinations of usernames and passwords. Some of the common attacks that threat actors will use. So sometimes they'll try what are called password spraying attacks. So we talked about credential stuffing attacks earlier, where we find one compromised username and password. So I might guess like, hey, if you're using this username and password for your Gmail account, maybe you're using the same thing for your bank account. I can get in your bank account with that same username and password and basically transfer money to myself or deplete your account. So some things like that. Some of the cool things with this is you'll see is that there were 6 valid passwords found the time I was talking about this. So here's one of them. The reason I'm seeing all of these attempts is because I basically turned on the verbose so you can see how it's trying each username and password combination here. So this is giving, again, it's basically found. Now at this point, since I found usernames and passwords that work with SSH, I can just log into the box right now knowing that information. And again, it was very simple, right? It's just putting in the IP address, the port and service were already set how I wanted them. I'm putting a username and password tag. Very easy to do, right? And there's very little skill to this. but it sort of talks to why you should use complex passwords, right? Because these things can be brute forced, as you've just seen. And also the other thing with password spraying is, like, I might take a list of usernames and I might try spring 2020 exclamation point on a whole bunch of usernames. So instead of accidentally locking out accounts and drawing undue attention, I try the same password on, tens, dozens, hundreds, thousands of user accounts without risking locking them out. And all I need to find is one person running spring 2020 as their password, and boom, I'm in. From there, I can start working on things like privilege escalation, stuff like that. So that's the difference between like credential stuffing and password spraying attacks. But hopefully that's sort of driving home the point why you want to use good password security. Because again, this stuff isn't hard. Like, I'm not breaking a sweat here trying to do, some really hard hacking stuff that's taking me forever and ever. This stuff is, and again, it's a free download, right? So anybody can just download this stuff and do these kind of things. Remember that disclaimer, particularly if you're going after government targets. I don't want to know about it. You're on your own. But yeah, so that's SPARTA. We'll go back to the slides here real quick. So I'm going to talk about Metasploit and Armitage. So Metasploit, it's the world's most widely used penetration testing software. We'll cover weaknesses and defenses and focus on the right risks to help you improve security. But of course, bad guys can use it too. The thing with Metasploit is you have to put in parameters and so forth, and you have to sort of know how to search for exploits and payloads and define those things. But Armitage makes that so much simpler, especially for script kiddies. So Armitage is really just a graphical front end for Metasploit. It makes it really simple, and you're going to see how simple in just a moment. So in this demo, we're going to use Armitage, and we're going to use an attempt to find and exploit vulnerabilities on another host. And our goal is to establish a remote shell with root level privileges. So let's go ahead and see if we can do that. I'm going to go back to my Kali box here. We'll go ahead and close out of SPARTA. Don't need my password list anymore. But let me just say, this. Maybe I don't even really want to try to use a username and password. That's something you can look for other vulnerabilities you can exploit. So normally that's going to be under exploitation tools, and I don't know why the link after I installed it doesn't actually launch it. I don't have time to really troubleshoot that. I'm just going to launch it old school style, which should really do the same thing here. So you could have your Metasploit instance on another box. In this case, I'm just connecting to the instance on this local system. So I'll go ahead and do that. Now, normally you should start the RPC service. The nice thing is that's just how a good demonstration of how easy Armitage makes it. It reminds you, like, hey, this isn't running. You want to start it? Well, yeah, sure. Again, it makes it easy because you can spend an awful lot of time going, why can't I connect? Well, because you didn't start the RPC service. So we'll give this just a moment here to go ahead and fire up. And now we're starting to get connected, and pretty soon here it is. And what we have is basically a pretty unimpressive screen here. But what I'll do is I'll go ahead and just add a host. And again, I'm just putting in an IP address. Again, I could really put in a whole network if I wanted to, specify it that way. It's going to tell me I added one host. And so here's my remote system. I don't really know a whole lot about this. So we talked about Nmap earlier. We'll just come under hosts and do an Nmap scan, and we'll just do a quick scan with OS detect, and just click on that. And again, it makes it so easy, right? The IP address is already in here. I don't have to retype this again. I just hit OK, and it's going to start scanning it, and we'll let that run. It'll take just a couple minutes here and to do that quick scan, then it'll spit back what it's found about the host. And notice right now we just have kind of a blank black screen. That's going to change here in a little bit. And we got some information already. It's found a lot of those same open ports. And again, a lot of these things we found in SPARTA, right? But here it is in Armitage. Scan's complete. So it pretty much tells you what your next step will be. We'll hit OK. But what you noticed is that the screen now has changed from just a blank black screen to now a picture of Tux. So we know it's a Linux box. At this point, I can just simply highlight this guy that I want. And again, if I had multiple systems, it would basically give me a screen like that for all the systems, and it would show like a Windows logo if I found a Windows box, so on. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the find attacks, and it's just going to give me a little progress bar here. So I'm just going to kick back and wait while it basically is scanning the system for things that it thinks it can exploit. And again, all I've done is I started with an IP address, and I'm just like clicking through a couple things here. This is nothing crazy hard. This is why I talk about the barrier, being a low barrier for offensive security tools now. It doesn't take a lot of skill to be able to do this. The real question is, though, is the attack going to work? And that's what we'll find out here momentarily. It's a live demo, so anything can happen, right? But hopefully we have some luck here. So it tells us the attack analysis is complete. We'll see an attack menu beside each host. And I only have one host here, but it's going to tell me happy hunting. So if we go back and look at the console window here, and we scroll up, again, we find all the services and so forth that it's found. One thing I could do is I could just go to attacks and do a Hail Mary, and it's just going to try to throw the kitchen sink at this box. We'll be a little more sophisticated than that. So the very first item in the list really is on port 21. It's this VSFTPD. So that's basically an FTP daemon. It's an FTP server, if you will. So let's see what we have. So if I go to attack and do FTP, and I can actually match up the version name, VSFTPD 2.3.4. Again, that could be a false, it could be inaccurate, but we'll go ahead and try it. And so here's a VSFTPD 2.3.4 backdoor. So we'll go ahead and connect or click on that. And again, normally if you're using Metasploit from the command line, you have to define your parameters. You have to define your payload, your exploit, the L host and the L port, which are the local host and the local port, and the remote host and the remote port, and so on. You have to do any of that with Armitage. Like, if you're serious about learning offensive security, you should learn how to use the command line version. But just to demonstrate how easy this stuff is, I'm just going to check the box to use a reverse connection and hit launch. And it's just, sit back and wait, and we'll see what happens. Keep an eye, if you will, on the image of the system here, as this is working to see what we can do. And notice how it turned red. Now we got lightning bolts around that image, right? So this basically tells us that, hey, it's opened up a command shell. So let's go ahead and right click. Now we have a new menu called shell, and I'm going to go ahead and click interact. And the first thing I'm going to do is figure out who am I, and root. I'm running as root. And the reason for that is because a lot of your daemons, particularly things that run on ports lower than 1000, have to run with root level privileges. So if those are the kinds of things that they can be compromised, usually you are going to be dumped into like a root shell like this. So at this point, let's go ahead and do pwd just to figure out where we are. See, we're in the root folder. So let's go ahead and do cd home. and see what's in here. I'm going to list out the directories, and so here we see we have an FTP directory, MSF admin, one called service and one called user. So let's go ahead and go into the user directory. And we'll do an ls-l. It says there's nothing in here. Let's actually go ahead and verify that. So let me go ahead and fire up another terminal here. That way I can make it a little bit bigger and everybody can see it a little bit better. So I'm just going to go ahead and SSH into the system. Go ahead and accept the key. And I'm logged into the host. So if I do back to home and then in the user folder, let me clear this. Oops. Didn't like that. All right, well, no worries. So again, nothing in this folder, and PWD, we are in the home user folder. So if I go back to my Kali instance, now we see the file here. Here's my actual authenticated session where I use the username and password. And you notice that message is there. If I try to cat it out, it's not going to let me. And the reason why is because I don't have permissions to that. Because it's owned by the root account, right? I created this in my compromised shell. So when I do cat message, permission denied, if I do a sudo bang bang, it's going to prompt me. Since I'm elevating my privileges, I may have fat fingered that, I did. And here I get the message, and now they own you. And so what that should demonstrate is from a remote session where I use no username and password and compromise a root shell account, I actually have more access from the Kali box than I did logged in as a legitimate user on the system locally. So that pretty much shows you how thoroughly owned that box really is, because what a malicious threat actor is going to do is they're going to work on establishing persistence. So they're going to start opening reverse shells and things like that to basically maintain their connection. They're going to start putting things into startup profiles and things like that to basically make sure they'll put in like cron jobs to basically open up shells. So the first thing they're going to do is they're going to make sure that they stay connected no matter what. And when a reboot happens, they'll reconnect back to them. But really from there, it's whatever they can find on the system, right? If there's a web server, they can go about defacing a website, database, they can dump all that stuff out. They could really do whatever they want, because again, they're running as root. They have unlimited access now to that particular host. So we'll go ahead and disconnect our shell, and we go back to normal prompt. And I'm just going to go ahead and close all of this out. But very powerful stuff. And again, like, it's gotten so easy, right? Like, that's again, didn't break a sweat doing that. So with that, we'll go ahead and continue and wrap up here momentarily. So our demo succeeded. So again, if you're interested in learning more about offensive security, there's a great free course, absolutely free, called Metasploit Unleashed. It's a great free ethical hacking course, great introduction. So there's the link to it if you want to go check that out. Again, if you get my slide deck at any point, it's got the link to it there. Highly recommended. It'll walk you through a whole lot of really cool stuff you can do with Kali and those metasploitable boxes for like I've used for demoing. So in conclusion, powerful vulnerability exploitation tools are readily available for free to tech defenders and malicious threat actors alike. The barrier to entry for unskilled attackers is very low. And just some provocative questions I want to leave you with. If you have a website or server, or you're using cloud storage, are you scanning that stuff? Are you using things to check and make sure you don't have accidental data exposure? Are you checking for weak credentials? Are you going out to have I been pwned and looking there? Are you checking to make sure you can't just be easily breached on a simple dictionary attack or other brute force method? Your systems and network devices vulnerable to simple exploit kit attacks. So just some things to think about as malicious threat actors. Yeah, they're probably already doing these things against us. So who would you rather have discover the exposed data, weak credentials, or easily exploitable vulnerabilities first? Hopefully the answer is you'd rather do those things yourself than have the bad guys find them out first. Because again, those are the stupid cyber criminal tricks. So some shameless plugs. So the next SIMPA Security SIG meeting is a threat roundup meeting. It's got some great technical content. It's actually one of the world-leading threat researchers. He works with Talos Group, which is currently owned by Cisco. He's actually in Austin, Texas. He was actually going to come all the way to Cincinnati to present for my group. We've kind of met and talked and chatted it up and so forth. Obviously, with the pandemic, it's going to be live remote video. But hey, if you're interested in attending that and seeing it out, our meetings are free. I would welcome everybody on this meeting to join us. Also, just to let everybody know, I'm going to be speaking at Circle City Con. That conference is based in Indianapolis. They've decided to go virtual this year as a conference, obviously for the same pandemic concerns. But I'm giving a talk there called Lend Me Your IRs. You've seen a couple of the sample phishing emails, but I actually use those emails in a couple other things and actually demo deep dives, and it's showing both the attacker side and the investigation side on those. And then I talk through what the remediation plans were for those. So I think it's a great talk. It's technical stuff. It's live demo heavy, and it's really cool because I actually show the attack code, how it works, and explain that. So fun stuff. So it's a whole weekend conference, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I'm looking forward to it. I spoke there a couple years ago. I've attended that thing, I think, just about every year they've had it. So I'm excited to be going back there as a speaker again. So if you like the security stuff, definitely consider checking it out. That's all I have for that stuff. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor to any questions out there.
Anybody have any questions for Matt? Well, it was a fact-filled presentation, Matt. Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome. It was a lot of recycled content because short notice and all, but I hopefully packaged it up in a way that kind of makes sense, and hopefully people get a feel for the kinds of threats that are out there, the things they can look for. And again, it's not about perfect security. It's about defense in depth and adding enough layers to make yourself a hard target to where you're not easily compromised.
So Matt, the vulnerability, it looks like it's a lot from your email versus your personal network. What kind of vulnerabilities would you say for people that are using internet services like AT&T, Verizon, at their home, using their equipment,
Yeah, so I'm definitely not a foremost authority on like cable modem hacking kind of stuff. There are actually some people doing some really cool stuff on that. I had something I only had a chance to sort of half listen to. So a couple of things you can do in a situation like that if you're concerned about what your IP or your ISP might have access to or what they might be leaking out there. One thing you can do that's pretty simple is you can actually change your DNS in your router. It's sometimes boils down to who do you want to trust with your domain lookup requests to. I know for a long time I've recommended, it's now Cisco Umbrella. It was formerly OpenDNS, but they still offer free packages where it's very simple. All you have to do is actually change the IP addresses for your DNS servers in your home router, and all your home network will do lookups there. Now the traffic will still route through your ISP and so forth. It's just that the domain request, so that your ISP loses a little bit of that context. There's some other ones out there, like there's Quad9, and there's some things that are related to privacy that are out there. That's some good stuff. But if you're really concerned about it, you can obviously sign up for.
Martin has a question. Go ahead, Martin. Martin, you there?
Yes, Matt, are you aware of, yes, can you hear me?
You know what? I apologize. I had it on mute a moment ago.
Got my microphone on.
When I was explaining that, so apologies to
Am
everybody.
I okay? Yeah,
there.
I see oh.
Martin,
The existence of something called av-comparatives.org, a site. I was asking whether you were aware of the existence of a site called av-comparatives, COMPARATIVES.org. I think they're based in Austria, and they run independent tests on antivirus and anti-malware and other security programs. I suppose I could call it up on my screen here and do a share screen, but I wonder whether you knew anything about it. They
I'm familiar with that.
used to accept advertising.
Martin,
So there's
suggest
like
you
a consumer report for security programs, but now they have begun accepting advertising. But they claim their tests are still unbiased.
Yeah, I'm not personally familiar with it. Maybe throw a link to it in the chat window for
I
everybody.
can mute.
Martin, you are breaking up on mine. Is anybody else noticing this?
yes, I'm noticing, Martin, you're breaking up. I'll bet somebody else is using your Wi-Fi.
Okay. Let me
And your screen
on my
image
glasses
here is
here.
frozen.
And
Anybody else? Martin, I assume.
oh dear. Oh, I'll bless my daughter. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Let me call her on the intercom. Wait a minute.
Martin, you're breaking
I'm
up.
sorry, my
badly.
chat thing isn't working. So I'm going to mute and let others ask questions.
Yeah, I didn't quite catch the URL. The audio for me was off though. Kind of tough. Maybe
Okay.
throw a link to that website on AV comparisons in the chat window. I'd be happy to check it out. I wasn't familiar with it though. And I may have been muted myself when I was trying to answer the DNS or the question about concerns about your ISP. So if that, just the short answer on that would be you could use alternate DNS providers
Okay.
in your routers, such as like Cisco Umbrella OpenDNS or Quad9, or there's a couple other alternate DNS providers. But if you're overly concerned about it, you could sign up for a VPN service. Thing to remember is then you're now putting your trust on your internet history at that DNS provider, or I'm sorry, that VPN provider. So hopefully I've gotten both questions, or at least I've addressed both of those questions now.
Yes. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions for Matt? Okay.
So Matt, we have seen on our website where I get, security emails, and it looks like people have discovered 3 of our users where in the beginning no one's discovered it. So are they discovering the name of our users using the programs that you've shown tonight?
It's a good question. It's hard to say, how the users get discovered. It sometimes boils down to, other sites getting breached. And a lot of those are covered in like the "Have I Been Pwned," things like that. I remember, I'm trying to think back, like the Ashley Madison data breach was particularly bad, basically for people that were looking for like adulterous relationships, and that they had, like for example, they found government accounts like, .mil military email accounts and .gov government accounts, as well as email accounts to people at big corporations. So not that everybody's even people using perfectly fine sites, if they get breached and they've got email accounts, usernames. The other thing is if your logins or certain login pages, like if you're, let's say you're using Office 365 and your login username is your email address, there are actually websites out there that will help basically people find the email formats that companies use. So you could basically, if you're doing open source intelligence gathering, people can use like LinkedIn to figure out who works at the company and then enumerate the email format that company uses and guess with a high probability what somebody's user account would be in some instances like that. Sometimes they're just, data breaches, and sometimes like in a dictionary, it's just guessed.
Yeah, it's our DMA website, and we're using WordPress, and we don't have blog or user accounts from, that are public. So they're only admin accounts only, but I see them going through trying it so many times until they get locked out for 2 hours, and then they come back later and try it again. But they have discovered over time 3 of our usernames and continue to try those 3. In the beginning, when we first set up WordPress, it took about 2-3 months before they even discovered the first one.
Yeah, the thing I've observed that threat actors are very persistent, and so WordPress is the most commonly used and deployed content management system, CMS, out there in the entire world. Because of that fact, it's also the most targeted by threat actors. Let me share something fun with everybody real quick here. And this was actually from my site called, or my talk called Active Defense Helping Threat Actors Hack Themselves. So it's part of that demo site. It wasn't really part of my talk tonight, but let me just share that out because I've got something fun that I think people will like.
Now, is that because the generic WordPress is WP dash something, and that's common for all WordPress logins?
It's definitely, oh yeah, it's definitely part of the issue. So let me go ahead and
I think I'm able to change that. I just forget how to do it, but I think I should be able to change that so that it's not the generic page that comes up.
Yeah. So let me share this. I forgot to show this off. So a site I like to use for finding, well, I think, yeah, I actually showed people Fish Tank. Here's another one I pulled up, but I've actually got something fun. It's from my talk called Active Defense Helping Threat Actors Hack Themselves. And what I've got is, so here's a WordPress login page. And anybody want to take a guess what my username and password are for this page?
Admin.
Yeah.
Let's try it. Nope, didn't work. Anybody else want to have a guess?
The domain name, admin.
Yeah, admin password.
Yeah, so the fun thing is that there's actually no username and password combination that will work on this because it's a fake WordPress login page. And the cool thing with this is that I actually love like once in a while I'll go back and I'll look at the server logs and I'll see all these brute force attempts. And a lot of times it's like from the Russian Federation or other Eastern European countries. And they spend all this time and energy trying to hack this login page. And of course, it's never going to work, right? Because it's a fake login page. It just bounces them right back to the first one. But it's probably the most hack attempt thing on that website that I run.
Is that easy to create and set up?
Yeah, it wasn't too hard for me. I like saved out the original page and like had to grab some of the cascading style sheet formatting and so forth. So like I played around with it a little bit, but it's one of those funny things where I just want to tell the threat actors like, hey man, just keep going. You maybe almost had it that last time. Maybe the next time we'll get you there. Of course, it never will, but I hope they keep trying all the same because I laugh when I see those things in the logs.
Is that code that I could probably find on Google to do that?
I don't know. I literally I think I used wget on an original one. Had to do some code cleanup and so forth.
Okay.
If you reach out to me, send me an email or whatever. I can zip it up and send it to you. There's not a lot to make this fake login page work, but yeah, it's so if you go to WP admin, it redirects you to the wp-login.php page, which is of course the default for any WordPress site. And again, it's part of the reason it's so heavily targeted by threat actors.
Okay,
Gary Turner has a, did you have any further questions, Mark?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, Gary Turner has his hand up. Gary, I'm unmuting you. I'm trying to unmute you now.
I was just going to say that you didn't mention roll your own VPN with like a bad Raspberry Pi at home. So that's easier to do, and there's plenty of tutorials online on how to do that. I mentioned Raspberry Pi just because it's a cheap and efficient way to power efficient way to have a VPN at home.
Yeah, great trip. Yep, for sure. So thank you for sharing. For the cost of a $35 Raspberry Pi, you can have your own VPN if you don't want to buy one already, prepackaged.
And just a couple of watts of power.
Yeah, very power, light on requirements, any requirements really.
Right.
Any other questions for Matt?
How do I raise my hand?
Did you raise your hand? Who raised your hand? Edwin? All right, Edwin, I'm unmuting you now. You can unmute yourself. There you go. You're unmuted.
I keep on, it's like every time I log into PayPal and, get something, I think there's something going on because I get these, emails in my junk file from PayPal. Now, my regular PayPal is not a problem, right? But these PayPal letters in the junk email account after I've signed in indicate to me that I've got a problem, right? So I'm wondering what I should do to or if there is anything I can do to stop these fake emails coming to me from PayPal.
Yeah, so normally, like it's a pretty heavily fished target because there's a lot that threat actors can do with PayPal accounts. Particularly, they can go on all sorts of shopping sprees and whatnot. In fact, in some of the live demo stuff I do, I show a lot of fake PayPal login stuff. One of my phishing examples includes that because, frankly, I see a lot of that stuff happening in the wild. What's interesting about your situation is it sounds like it's maybe the timing is seems a little too coincidental if I'm hearing you right, where it's right after you're done logging in using the service, then that's when you're seeing the messages hit. It might be. I assume that you've probably, hopefully, you've like done some scanning in your system. Maybe looked at add-ins and extensions for your browser. Make sure there's nothing there that's unexpected.
Right. It's what's happening is they're sending me these things saying, click here to make sure verify your phone number, and I know that the phone number is verified, but I don't click on the links. I don't obviously take the PayPal things up, but I'm wondering if there's if they're just phishing because I have signed in, or if there's something that I have done to open myself up to this, is I guess my major question. And it's like I'm running Malwarebytes. I have no, I get, every time I run scans and stuff, I get nothing. I don't think it's on my end. They're obviously not getting my real things. They're saying, oh, we're going to cancel your PayPal account. And, one more, if you don't do this, we're going to cancel your PayPal account. And I signed into PayPal and everything's fine. So it's like, it's not real. They're just trying to, they're phishing is what they're doing, right?
Yeah, PayPal phishing is very common. Like, the top two are Office 365. Those probably predominantly target businesses, and then PayPal. Like, those are probably a couple of the top two things that are targeted. And some of the other things as well, like, things that are used for single sign-on purposes. So like Facebook accounts, LinkedIn accounts, Twitter accounts, things that are used. But if you're seeing things that are timing specific and you have concerns, so I'm trying to find on Krebs on Security. He does a good job of, sort of providing instructions. He kind of goes to the extreme where he actually uses like a Linux live CD specifically for doing banking. And then, basically he's got a completely system where everything he does is in volatile memory. And so basically once he shuts down, there's nothing, no traces left, no lingering infections, things like that. I'm trying to find out, I'm trying to find on this page where he's got instructions. I think he's endorsed Puppy Linux is one of his favorite go-tos. Let me see if I can find it, and I'll put a link in the chat when I do. It's a thought. It's, not super convenient to boot into a live CD every time you want to use PayPal, but it's not the worst idea if you're not doing it like super often.
I'm not going to hit the links on these emails. It's like I'm sort of smart enough not to do that, but it just seems odd that they're always like right after I've, bought a DVD or something like that, or something else where, I've used PayPal, that these increase. So obviously they're knowing I'm using it or something, and I don't know if it's on their end or on my end. And that's what I guess I'm sort of wondering if I need to check. They obviously are not getting into the account. There is no real serious issues, but there's something there, and I don't know if it's on their end or on mine.
Mm. I've not really heard of that happening with a lot of other people. So I know somebody, Dimitri, said maybe try using another computer for a little bit. I went in and threw a link to that, Krebs. I did finally find that article on, basically banking on a live CD. that, again, PayPal's much like banking, so maybe not, something to try just to see if you still see, that weird timing where it seems to be very coincidental that you're getting fished specifically for PayPal right after using their service.
Well, in my the regular PayPal emails come through, so I'm sort of smart enough not. They'll say thank you for your order, right? But in my junk mail, it's this. Oh, you gotta check in.
Yeah, the other thing you have to be cautious of is so Yahoo Mail has been breached, numerous times, and so there's a lot of leaked email accounts. They've been, breached and compromised numerous times. And what some people don't realize is sometimes even their ISP, so SBC Global, a lot of people had SBC Global service that they were using for internet. They actually use Yahoo Mail as their back end. And when Yahoo was breached, they were breached as well. So stuff like that can happen. And
breached a year or two ago, I think, weren't they?
A couple times. Probably
the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, probably the last several years. So, a lot of providers would basically subcontract their email out to Yahoo. So a lot of times, even though you didn't have a Yahoo Mail account specifically, it really was behind the scenes for SBC Global users, as one example.
Bill Taylor had his hand up. Bill, go ahead. You're unmuted.
Okay, thank you. My question is not really related to the topic, but my computer has locked up 3 times during this session. And I'm sure you've noticed that I had to log in a couple of times. And so the question is, I'm running Ubuntu. Why am I locking up like this? Anybody have any ideas?
Are you online or you Wi-Fi?
I'm online. I got a wire from the router to my computer.
Are you running any other applications?
No, sir.
Gary Turner, you got any ideas on that? You're unmuted.
Yep. There's, from here, just so many things that could go wrong. Bill, does it happen any other time? Is it just while you're using Zoom?
Just when I'm using Zoom.
Are you using the current Zoom application, the newest?
Yeah, I downloaded it, day before yesterday. I assume that's the latest version.
There was one that came to me today, even though I had downloaded the other day. So there might be a new one today.
Well, I'll check on that after we're offline.
Okay.
Okay. I appreciate the help. I'm new to this. I just started with Zoom and I'm still learning some of the ropes, like how do I raise my hand?
Nice. Well, my entire presentation was done on an Ubuntu box, so I'm glad the lockups didn't happen to me since I was doing the demos.
Well, you know a little bit more about it than I do.
Ed's got his hand up. Ed, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I had a question about, we read this on the Wall Street Journal, and they have ransomware. And on ransomware, they said they had some teenagers or something that didn't know what they were doing. And they went out there and they did some ransomware stuff. And they ended up not knowing how to unransom. People had the ransomware and they couldn't undo it.
Yeah, that's sort of why, I put that in the slide deck. The script kiddies, they may be low skill, but they can do some damage. They can do some serious damage in part because they don't know what they're doing. And so, yeah, sometimes some messes are easier to get into than out of. I've been there many times in my life, but that's a funny story and tragic at the same time, because you certainly feel for the people that, had their files locked up and then they can't get them back for real. Hopefully they had them backed up somewhere, but if they were trying to pay the ransom, probably not.
Yeah, and the other question, or the only other thing I had a question about, and this is to everybody, I guess, is are we going to be at TJ Chumps next month?
Probably not. Probably not. In fact, I have an announcement about that later on, right before the meeting ends.
Okay, that's all.
Andy, Jake, Ella, and Clara, were you raising your hand? You're on mute. You're muted. They're gone. Okay. All right. Martin, did I see your hands, or you're doing some stuff? How you doing there, Martin?
I'm just playing around with my computer.
It's still-
I didn't have my hand up.
You still have a bad, what sounds like a Wi-Fi feedback.
I do. Wait a minute, let me move the speaker away. A couple of comments, though, since you got me on, and that is about virtual works. One of my sons, who's on his second tour of duty, and tells me he tried ordering some Christmas presents through various vendors, LL Bean, Amazon, and couldn't get orders confirmed. He found out that many security software and the vendors will turn back virtually anything coming from a server in Afghanistan, even if it's from the U.S. military. They will return it back. So he uses a virtual private network that's his coming from an American server, his email. That I'm interesting.
Martin, you're still breaking up badly.
It doesn't have all that much to do with U.S.
Yeah, I have to apologize. I only heard maybe every fifth word of that at best.
Martin, I think we need to buy you a headset. Can he? Okay.
Yeah, I
All right,
apologize.
Gary Turner had his hand up. Go ahead, Gary.
I think we should wire him up too.
I was just gonna say, headphones would probably help him a lot.
Say what now?
That headphones would probably help him a lot.
Oh yeah,
I think the speakers and the microphone are just fighting each other.
could
And,
be.
yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions for Matt? We're going to run a little long today, but it was a real good meeting. I think a lot of good questions too. Any other Mike Stock? Go. Okay, Mike, you're unmuted.
Matt, I've noticed that people are sending links to a Google document file and having a link embedded in that, along with some pictures perhaps, to lure people places, I guess. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, I've actually seen that. So, there's a lot of cool sites where you can do like stuff that are free because the cost to use those things for nefarious purposes is free. Threat actors tend to gravitate to those. So I've seen like all kinds of stuff. I've seen like people using, free Microsoft SharePoint sites, Google Documents. I've seen just all kinds of things leveraged, even just like free Gmail accounts. And it's hard to tell whether or not they were accounts that were compromised or that they just were spun up because it was free to do so. So it's always hard to tell, but I've seen all kinds of, if it's, the threat actors quickly adopt the motto, if it's free, it's for me. And I've seen a lot of that where they will use that service to link out to somewhere else. And I talk a little bit about that in that talk I have called Lending Your IRs, showing how deep down the rabbit hole sometimes they will go to sort of hide where the actual payload is. And the other part of that is it gets hard to detect and stop, right? So if I have, like, let's say I have 5 fake Google Documents accounts, I can create 5 documents pointing to the same site, and it's very hard for places to block something like Google Documents, because if they do, then it's like an all or nothing thing, and people might be using that for legitimate purposes. But I've seen that where one thing will go to something, it'll go to something, and then it's actually at that final place where the actual malicious stuff is. And I've seen all manners of that. So I've seen it with like fake, like, hey, you need to electronically sign this document to, all kinds of lures, like, hey, here's your free, get your free iPhone, get, this, that, like adult content, whatever you have, man. I've seen it all. Like, I've seen just everything imaginable. But yeah, it's sometimes not where the first link goes, where the malicious content is, or the exploit kit or whatever. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 hops away from that, and they'll just like string it along. And it does, because it takes time to investigate and unravel that. And a lot of times, so like enterprise security tools, a lot of times they might stop after the first hit. It really takes a person doing the analysis to actually see that, okay, the threat didn't just stop here, it actually went to here to here. So it makes it harder to detect, it makes it harder to stop. So that's another reason threat actors will do it. And also they know, like they generally know that things have a certain shelf life. So like, hey, maybe I compromise a WordPress site. Well, it's only a matter of time before the ISP shuts it down, or the hosting provider shuts it down, or it gets reported to the site owners and they fix it or whatever. So I see a lot of free stuff leveraged, and I see a lot of tricks to that threat actors go to hide what they're doing.
We have Gary Turner unmuted, and after Gary, it'd be Chester. Go ahead, Gary.
No, I said what I had said before, so sorry.
Okay, now Chester. I'm unmuting you now, Chester. Chester?
Chester's asleep.
It looks like it.
Yep.
Okay, well, it wasn't that boring of a presentation, Matt. I appreciate it.
How do you raise your hand there? I was trying to figure that out.
Oh, okay. Ed, did you want to speak? Go ahead, Ed.
I was just asking about how people are raising the hand. I was trying to remember how to do that, and I was looking for it.
Well, you have 2 ways. If you see participants.
Okay, I'm in that. I was in.
Okay, you see the list, and at the bottom you'll see more.
Well, I thought.
And then you can click on the clap, or you can go to reactions.
Oh. Reactions.
Those are the only ways that I know how to do it. Anybody else have any?
Well, I have a raise hand icon.
How do you get to that?
Well, it's at the bottom of the participants list. There's a thing there about yes, the vote where you vote yes and no, and go faster and slower. The far left hand part of that is raise hand, at least on my screen.
No, not on mine. Now, maybe it's because I'm the host.
Well, probably so.
Yeah, but I have you as a co-host, I think. No, you don't. Not right now.
You do. So yeah, that may be it.
Yeah.
That's on the reaction. That's how I found it.
Muted now.
Reactions?
Yeah, and the reactions, there's 2 hands.
Yeah, I think that's probably why there's a clap hands and there's a thumbs up for me. But again, because I'm the host, that could be because that's why I don't see the hand up.
Is my mic active now?
It is now, Chester.
Okay, yeah. It wanted me to okay you unmuting me, so I got that taken care of. Every so often I get some SMS on the phone here with, of course, just a short little link. So what I'll do is I'll go to the Linux box and type it in manually, and all it pops up with is this PHP server is configured. What the heck are these people trying to do?
So sometimes what happens is that when threat actors send out a link to something, whether it's email or through SMS, commonly called smishing, sometimes what they do is they will actually weaponize the URL after it's been delivered to the mailbox or hits the phone. So in other words, to make sure it doesn't get caught in a spam filter, they will basically send it out, and then they will actually weaponize the landing page a minute or two after that. The other things that they can do is that they can, sometimes they're just looking for, collecting metadata or finding vulnerable devices. So anytime you go to a server, it produces an awful lot of log files, and you can actually, it's used by marketers, but also threat actors will use something called pixel tracking, where they'll have like a 1-by-1 pixel on a screen. It may even be a transparent pixel, and that's enough on the back-end server where it will basically get the browser to spit out all kinds of information like your IP address, the browser you're using, the operating system you're using, all of those things. The other thing that I've seen threat actors do is sometimes they write code that actually checks for like a vulnerable version of a browser, and it will direct you. If you have a vulnerable version, it might direct you somewhere, and if it's not a vulnerable version, it'll direct you somewhere else. And then sometimes I've seen other instances where there's an exploit kit on a page, and it just tries to indiscriminately blast everything that hits it, regardless of what it is. So there's several scenarios I've seen where that's used.
Okay, thank you.
Beth, Dave, and Bob in that order. Beth, you're next. Unmuted.
I don't know how.
You're
You're
speaking.
on.
You're talking. We got you.
Oh, good. I just wanted to say hello to the group because I'm brand new to Zoom and I wanted to see if it would work. That's all.
It
Well,
works
thank you
fine.
for joining us. We appreciate it. Dave, next. Dave, you're unmuted.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. This is a little off subject, but it's Zoom. In other Zoom meetings that I've had, we've had problems with people having the automatic adjust for your volume. So under your settings, sometimes it's under video, but you want to go to audio settings. Under your microphone, there's an automatic adjust the volume. Probably want to turn that off. It has proven to be problematic in a lot of meetings. So that's it.
Thank you for the tips. Appreciate it. Now, Bob.
Okay, a while ago, people were asking about the raise the hand option. If you go down to the bottom where it says participants and left click with the mouse, it'll bring up another window, and it'll have the list of the participants on there, and you have options like raise hand, lower hand, yes and no to a question, go slower, go faster. And then more is another option, which is either a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or like a handshake, or like a coffee break, and then what time it is, I guess. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate that. Any other questions? We ought to wrap this up. We've gone almost 40 minutes over now. Any other questions, though? Quick questions. Matt, thank you, man. You came through for me, and I appreciate it.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me. It's been nice to be back in a DMA meeting here, and I can put this on my long list of places where I've spoken. So thank you very much for having me. Appreciate all the questions and all the great comments. So hopefully you liked it. It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again, man. I owe you a meal. We usually buy meals for our speakers. Next time you come up, you got one.
Thank you very much. It's a very good presentation.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, one thing I did not mention earlier, Martin did a terrific job.